Welcome back to this Moneycontrol live stream. You're watching Closing Bell with me, Nandita Khemka, and my colleague.
Hello there, I'm Yatin Mohta.
Yatin, it was a fairly range-bound day for the market, but in the second half, just about half an hour, 40 minutes, before market close, there was, news flow coming in. There was escalation, or there has been escalation in border tensions, because of which we saw fag and selling, and we saw the Nifty, succumb to the day's low. 140-point cut on the index. In fact, the fear gauge, the India VIX, jumped 13%, and we are very close to that 22 level. So yes, that's the kind of volatility that has that is there in the market today. All the sectors, mostly all of the sectors, saw selling pressure. In fact, there was a knee-jerk reaction in the money market as well. You saw bond yield spiking, and there was some bit of weakness when it comes to the rupee as well. Now, let's understand what exactly has happened. In the calibrated and proportionate military response, the Indian Armed Forces this morning targeted air defense radars and systems at multiple locations inside Pakistan. Of course, this was in response, in the same domain and in the same intensity as Pakistan. How this situation evolves is something that we'll be watching out for. But what does this really mean? What will be the implications of this? Let me bring on board, the Bodhisattva Ganguly, who's the group consulting editor at Network 18. Bodhi, thanks a lot for joining in this evening. Given the current escalation, how likely is it now that the conflict could spiral into something of like a full-scale war? And what indicators should we watch out for to gauge whether both sides are preparing for further military engagement here on? Your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's difficult to say whether it'll slide into a full-scale war at this point. I don't think that will happen. If you're referring to if by full-scale war you're referring to ground incursions or something like that by both sides. But having said that, by the very nature of conflicts is that they are unpredictable. Obviously, Pakistan did attempt a very big retaliatory action last night. It failed because it was neutralized by Indian air defense, by our air defense, as the press release from the Ministry of Defense points out. And then we have now launched a series of drone attacks on a number of cities, military targets, and an air defense system has in Lahore has reportedly been neutralized. So it does mark a significant escalation. Again, if you look at the wording of the press release is very professional. It is saying that it's in the same domain and the same intensity of the Pakistani response on Wednesday night or early Thursday morning. So that's very professional. It depends quite clearly on what Pakistan will do next, on whether they try a bigger response, whether they. If you remember, Pakistan has been shelling Poonch now, continuously since since Operation Sindoor, and about 15 or 16 civilians have been killed, including children in Poonch. So it depends on whether Pakistan steps up its response. It resorts to more artillery shelling. It tries, air attacks, and so on and so forth. Because India has made it very clear today. The External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, made it clear earlier today that while India does not want to escalate, any Pakistani attempt to escalate or to step up the intensity of the conflict will be met by a very firm response. So yes, this could go on for some days, and I think it largely depends on what Pakistan does. Again, no one can predict these things, but unlikely that it will step into ground incursions or a ground warfare as of now. But
right,
in the dynamics of conflict, very difficult to predict.
Right. Bodhi sir, Yatin also joining in from the studios. A pleasure having you on the show. I would like to ask you, the kind of engagement, which has been done by Pakistan. The PIB release says that Pakistan attempted attacks on Amritsar, Kapurthala, Chandigarh, even Gujarat's Bhuj was targeted, in this attack.
That's right. Yeah.
Never ever have we seen, Pakistan or India really move beyond, POK. So this is not limited to Jammu and Kashmir. It is spreading to different cities. In fact, there are footages available, a lot of speculative, content on social media, which even says that Rawalpindi, as well as Lahore, the cities have also been targeted apart from military installations. Obviously, we don't know exactly what is the situation, but talking about escalation, since the capital markets are panicky, especially after the PIB release came in, we saw 100-point plus cut on the Nifty. Do you think the situation will be quite tense over the next 4-5 days, and what kind of escalation do you see possibly coming in from Pakistan or India? Do you think aerial attack or or something like a drone warfare could be the next big trigger for the next 3-4 days?
Yeah, quite possible. I think the next 3-4 days will be tense. See, the Indian, the PIB press release talks about a very large number of locations in India: Avantipura, Srinagar, Jammu, Pathankot, Amritsar, Kapurthala, etc., and Bhuj, which is in Gujarat. Big cities also. It includes Chandigarh, Jalandhar, Ludhiana. While there is a lot of footage on social media talking about, as you mentioned, possible attacks on Rawalpindi and so on and so forth, the Indian statement only refers to an air defense system in Lahore being neutralized. Since last night, there has been again chatter on social media about drone attacks on Sialkot, but that hasn't been confirmed. The release refers only to Lahore. See, again, as I said, it depends on what the Pakistanis do next. I mean, if, for example, the Pakistani Air Force, because this appears to be drone attacks from Pakistan's side. So drone attacks, and it doesn't. I mean, the Indian release doesn't talk about the details of what was done, but I presumably drone attacks, possibly missile attacks. So those were neutralized. Pakistani Air Force gets into that again creates its own sort of set of dynamics. So, I mean, I think the markets, as you said, did for the first time reacted adversely to the ongoing developments in the last hour. And the VIX, the fear index, certainly rose. You could, I think, this will continue for the next 3 or 4 days. But having said that, I think India, possibly the positives. I mean, India, there has been an attempt by the government, if one could look somewhat into the medium term and look through this. There has been an attempt by the government to create an Indian defense industrial complex, and a lot of Indian private sector companies have been getting into manufacturing of various weapon systems, right? I mean, from artillery to and so on and so forth. And I'm not sure. I think it's the Indian government, the statement doesn't refer, but India is developing a capability in drone warfare, which perhaps you could see the companies which are into Indian defense production. I don't want to, there are some big private sector companies beyond the PSUs also, and then there are a lot of startups which is doing, from what I understand, quite innovative stuff when it comes to drones and so on and so forth. And I think India will double down on that over the over the medium term and long term, even the short term. And I think so these companies, so there could be, if they are listed, they could see a rise depending on what kind of capability. It's very clear. I think we've used, again, depending on social media chatter, we've used possibly Israeli drones. There was, and I think on the first day of Operation Sindoor, we used Polish drones. But I think there are also Indian drone manufacturers and so on and so forth. So it certainly helps, and the experience will certainly help. The thing here is obviously the Indian government will try to indigenize, will try to build local capabilities, whether it comes to India has considerable capabilities when it comes to ballistic missiles of various ranges. That has been there for years, but the drone capability is being built up. So it will certainly help, strengthen India's indigenous defense sector, not just the large private sector companies such as L&T and Bharat Forge, and to some extent Tata's, which have been in Mahindra, which have been into this, apart from the public sector makers, but also a lot of, if one put it, startup type companies, which do stuff like drones and so on, both the hardware and the software. So it'll certainly help the Indian defense industrial complex, and I'm using the words in a good sense here, not a bad sense. or not a pejorative sense, to be strained. But the point is, but certainly I think you will see a volatile period through certainly tomorrow and into next week. As I said yesterday, I don't expect this to last very long. Particularly because I think Pakistan's capability of continuing this clash beyond a number of days is quite limited. It also, quite frankly, depends on how other parts such as the US and so on intervene. And I think they're talking to both parties. The US has called for a de-escalation. So let's see how it goes. Right now, in the short term, it depends on whether there's any further Pakistani actions. And because if there are Pakistani actions, the government is making it very clear that there'll be a strong counteraction from our side. So markets could expect some volatility.
Bodhi, with that, we'd like to thank you for taking our time. We can expect volatility in the short term. With that, Bodhi, thanks a lot for taking our time and sharing your thoughts with us. And we will be connecting with you, on and off as and when there are more developments on this front. On that note, let me also bring on board Kunal Shah, Associate Fund Manager at Carnelian Capital. Kunal, thanks a lot for joining in this evening. Do you think the markets were underestimating the scale of escalation that we are witnessing right now? Because we did see a knee-jerk reaction, once the news came by. How are you looking at this development, and what are your thoughts as to what happens to the market here on?
Thank you for having me on the show. Till yesterday, it was looking like, while we were all nervous, and that was there in the markets as well, but it was looking like, it's not going to be escalating to the place where we are today. And we saw after the press release a sudden drop in the market in the last half an hour, right? So certainly, markets were nervous, but they were not expecting the kind of retaliation that has happened. So, that was the take from the markets. But otherwise, I believe volatility will be there whenever there is uncertainty. We have already seen that umpteen number of times in the recent past. So this will continue for a while and keep the markets under check, from moving ahead from here on. So, that's the 2 cents on the volatility part.
And what is the kind of strategy one should adopt to navigate these volatile times? At Carnelian, what is your strategy now?
To stay put is the best strategy, but at the same time, incremental deployment has to be spread out, because this volatility will give enough opportunity to steady and slowly deploy the money. Structurally, nothing changes for India, from 3 to 5 year perspective. Nothing changes in a lot of companies, irrespective of whatever is happening presently, right? Even we have seen on the tariff parts, right? We have already cracked the deal with the UK government as well, right? So structurally, 3 to 5 year, nothing changes meaningfully. In fact, if at all, it further puts up India on a very strong footing. So the best thing is to stay put in this kind of markets, right? Not to think much of from a short-term perspective. Maybe not to get carried away by the volatility and miss the bigger picture. That is what we are doing at Carnelian. Asking our investors to look beyond the volatility. Nothing changes structurally for India, for sure, from 3 to 5 year perspective, or even for that matter, 1 year out from now.
Right. Kunal, hi. Yatin also joining in from the studios in the conversation. Talking about the perspective, Q4 result season hasn't been great. Obviously, there was earlier in the start of the quarter noise on trade wars ever since Trump has assumed office. Then comes the India-Pakistan conflict. Earnings season haven't been great, so far. In fact, people are now looking at downgrades for FY26 earnings estimates. In terms of Q4 earnings, in terms of what sectors look like, would you continue to like defense stocks, banking stocks, pharma stocks, which are probably insulated from all of these news or probably benefit as such, or would you rather focus on high beta names or probably concentrate your portfolio on mid caps over correction?
Sure. So I think, as you highlighted, the result seasons have been a mixed bag. I would not say that completely they have been wet. There have been pockets where the numbers have been good. So banking is something which we believe should kind of continue to do get, except for PSU banks where they are seeing a little bit of NIMS pressure, largely on the corporate side. Otherwise, the GNPA numbers, etc., look on a very strong footing for a few private banks. NBFCs should do good with the interest rate cut and improving liquidity. And more so on the domestic front, there's been a lot that is happening. So that should continue to do well. I think the uncertainty revolving around the export markets on account of tariffs, etc., does continue, and it will continue for a while. But net over there also, with the we've seen textile sector opening up big time because of the treaty FTA that we have signed with the UK yesterday, right? So there are pockets of opportunities in these spaces like textiles, engineering, capital goods, a few certain auto anchors, etc., where they remain insulated from whatever is happening in the global markets, right? Which give us a good opportunity to kind of invest from 3 to 5 year perspective and have decent, money making opportunity.
Sure, Kunal, thus far we've seen FIIs, maintaining their faith or keeping their faith in the Indian market despite simmering tensions between India and Pakistan. There are other tailwinds that have emerged, right? Of course, it's the UK FTA. Then crude has also emerged as a tailwind. It fell below that $60 per barrel mark, and the global brokerages have also slashed their target price where Brent is concerned. So, if one were to look at some crude-related themes now, which ones would you look at? And also the fact that rate cut in the Indian context, we are in the middle of the rate cut cycle, which is, I think, one more reason why FIs are staying put when it comes to the Indian market. Within the rate sensitive basket, aside of private banks, which are the pockets you would look at?
So I think we have already seen a good rally in OMCs because of what has happened to the crude, right? There are certain niche sectors, again, like tires, etc., which would be a beneficiary because of the crude coming down and derivatives of crude coming down. So that pockets also should kind of continue to do good. There are other lot of consumers, and there are a lot of other consumers of crude related derivatives in chemicals, which also will see a benefit playing out in Q1 and Q2, which should also kind of do good for the next financial year, right? So structurally also crude coming down helps India because of the current account deficit, right? So that augurs well for certain pockets of companies and sectors which I mentioned, other than the likes of OMCs. What was the second question?
Second question was on the rate cut cycle. We are in the middle of a rate cut cycle where India is concerned, even though the Fed has hit the pause button. If you were to look at the rate sensitives right now, barring banks, would you choose realty? Would you look at auto? Which are the other pockets that would catch your interest now?
I think two-wheelers is a space which still looks interesting in the auto and auto space, and which would be a beneficiary of the rate cuts also. At the same time, sectors, certain pockets in PV space which have new launches lined up, right, also would be a beneficiary and which should do good. And we've seen them coming out with good numbers also. Having exposure to farm-related or rural economy also is the sector which will kind of do good and be a beneficiary of the rate cuts, as and when that happens in the near future.
Sure. That's the view then, Kunal. I would like to thank you for taking our time and joining us this afternoon and sharing your thoughts with us. Look forward to more interactions with you going forward as well. Well, on that note, of course, we've come to the end of closing bell. We saw a 1,000-point cut on the Nifty Midcap Index. Yatin. Yes. Yesterday, the Midcap Index was outperforming. It managed to
gain 500 points.
Yeah, gain 500 points. And today, of course, in a knee-jerk reaction to the escalation in tensions between India and Pakistan, we saw the markets taking a hit, the Midcap taking a sharper knock. But of course, as Bodhi was also mentioning, and so was Kunal, that the situation will be fluid, it will be volatile in the short term. Perhaps it will be prudent to stay put and let the situation, play out and then, take a call. But with that, completely timed out on this edition of Closing Bell. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Stay tuned to Moneycontrol For all the latest news and updates, we'll catch you tomorrow morning with the markets at 9 a.m.
Hello and a very warm welcome from Srinagar. I'm Shiv Arur. This is part of our continuing coverage from Kashmir 2 weeks after the Pahalgam terror attack. Two big moves by the Indian government have sent shockwaves not just across India, but most definitely across the border and also across the world. Step number one, the Indian Home Ministry has just ordered civil defense drills across states. These are of a scale that have not been ordered since the 1971 war and involve everything from air raid warning siren drills, civilian and student training, crash blackout measures, camouflaging vital installations, and basically getting the entire civilian population ready for any kind of national security emergency. The reasons could be obvious, and they do send out a message of India preparing the entire country for what could be India's next big move against Pakistan. The other big move, something that is far less visible than civil defense drills, are the shutting off of the crucial Baglihar Dam in the Jammu region. This has lowered the water levels of the Chenab River and begun to squeeze Pakistan dry. India is keeping to its promise of punishing Pakistan for Pahalgam with the Indus Water Treaty. And anyone who thought that this was just smoke and mirrors didn't account for the fact that India would be turning the screws. And what happened in Akhnur today is just the beginning of what could be perhaps the biggest non-military action against Pakistan. In fact, I visited the front line of India's water war that has been declared against Pakistan. It's the Wular Lake. You may not have heard of it if you haven't visited Kashmir, but it happens to be the very battlefield of how India will be squeezing Pakistan dry. Here's my big ground report on that. Hello and welcome to this special ground report as part of our continuing coverage from Kashmir in the aftermath of the Pahalgam terror attack. We're here today in Bandipora on the banks of the Wular Lake. This isn't just the biggest freshwater lake in the Indian subcontinent and one of Asia's largest. It's also the front line of an epic water war that India has declared on Pakistan as a punitive measure for what happened in Pahalgam. As India sets aside its obligations under the Indus Water Sharing Treaty, this lake you see here, the Wular Lake, now lies at the heart of how that's going to be executed. We're sailing now on a key battlefield of the Indus Water Treaty, the biggest punitive measure so far by India taken against Pakistan in the aftermath of Pahalgam. Now, this particular lake is very important because under the 1960 Indus Water Treaty that India has now suspended with Pakistan, the Jhelum River, the key Jhelum River that flows into this wetland, is allocated to Pakistan. But here's the clincher. India has the right to use this same water for non-consumptive purposes. And that's where the strategic value and role of the Wular Lake actually kicks in. Because for any rebalancing of water power, it's going to boil down to storage and control. And that, for India, begins right here on the Wooler Lake. I'm joined by Sameer Iqbal Bhatt, who's a youth leader. He's grown up in Bandipora, which is a town on the banks of this vast lake that has now become very key to what's happening between India and Pakistan. Sameer bhai, thank you for your time and for being with us on this beautiful lake. You know, very few people have heard about it. Even fewer people have visited it. I have been visiting Kashmir for 20 years as a journalist, and this is my first time on the Wooler Lake. And here it is now at the center of this face-off between India and Pakistan after Pahalgam. Tell us about the significance of why we are talking about the Wooler Lake today in the context of the Indus Water Treaty.
First of all, Shiv, you have been first time in this Wooler, so I welcome you wholeheartedly and with your team. Wooler Lake is the largest wetland in our country as well as Asia. This is our water.
Yeah.
This is our land. So first of all, if we are not using this water, so how come our neighboring country can use this water? This Indus Treaty is a very big thing. And even though in the agreement, we are using just 20% of this and 80% has given to the Pakistan. So पहली बात तो ये अगर हम देखें हमारे को तो यही पे नाइंसाफी है. We are just using 20% and we belong from this place. अगर हम कहीं पे भी रहते हैं हमारा जहाँ पे घर होता है जो हमारा आसपास की चीजें our neighboring things, so we are the first honored person, we are the honor कि हमें उस चीज को यूटिलाइज करना है. हम इस चीज का सिर्फ 20% we are using.
So you think कि ये Indus Water Treaty को बहुत पहले suspend करना चाहिए था, that it should have been done before and it's being done only now. You know, in the past when there have been terror attacks, Sameer bhai, there has been talk कि क्या ये suspend करना चाहिए या नहीं. Why do you think it has happened this time? And you're happy that it has happened at least now?
Yes, even I am affiliated and belong from the National Conference family. So our president, our honorable president, Dr. Farooq Abdullah Sahab, recently उसने बता दिया, we are with this. अगर इससे कोई solution निकलता है, definitely people of our country, people of India, people of Jammu and Kashmir, they are welcoming this thing.
The Indus Water Treaty will take a long time to come into effect, the suspension of it, the punitive measure that India has taken. But the end result of it and what it does to Pakistan is gargantuan by any stretch of imagination. Like 80% of irrigation in Pakistan is dependent on water that is released to it under the Indus Water Treaty. Hydroelectric power, which is an overwhelmingly depends on this water coming in from India, will be stalled. Energy security will be crippled in many ways. Food security, farming will be completely crippled or paralyzed in Pakistan. And the future of the country's economy will be imperiled by just this one move. That is really how angry India is about what has happened in Pahalgam as a cumulative effect of terror over the decades. Another key flashpoint in this larger battle over water between India and Pakistan in the wake of the Pahalgam terror attack is something called the Tulbul navigation project. It was proposed by India in the 1980s as a way to regulate the flow of the Jhelum in order to make it much more navigable downstream. Now, Pakistan didn't like this. Pakistan felt threatened because they thought that this would mean that this reservoir would give India more leverage. So they actually stalled it, and therefore India couldn't proceed with it under the Indus Water Treaty. But now, with this flashpoint, with India suspending and holding in abeyance the treaty itself, the Tulbul navigation project has re-emerged as a possibility. And Pakistan, of course, is not hiding its panic whatsoever. I'm joined with another person now who has been on the Wooler Lake for many, many years. क्या है ये Tulbul navigation project और अब ये फिर से सामने क्यों आया है?
देखिए, Tulbul जो navigation project था, India proposed to make the hydro projects and other things, जिससे क्या होता कि यहाँ की खासकर जम्मू एंड कश्मीर की जो इलेक्ट्रिसिटी क्राइसिस है या बाकी जो वाटर रिसोर्सेज जहाँ पे हमें यूज होता है वो क्राइसिस हमें कम होती. एग्रीकल्चर जो क्राइसिस है यहाँ पे, हालांकि हमारे पास बहुत सारी वेटलैंड है यहाँ पे, आप जो जिस वलोर में आप जो हम जा रहे हैं इस टाइम, दिस इज द पार्ट ऑफ दैट इंडस वाटर ट्रीटी. और जो नेविगेशन वो प्रोजेक्ट जो आप बात कर रहे हैं, उससे क्या हुआ कि जो फ्लो है to balance the flow of the Jhelum. उससे क्या हुआ कि हमारा जो हमारा वाटर रिसोर्सेज की जो कमी थी हमें उस फ्लो को मैनेज करके जो है हमारी जो कमी थी वो पूरी हो जाती, उसको बराबर किया जाता. उसलिए दैट इज व्हाई इंडिया प्रपोज्ड इन 1980s दिस ये प्रोजेक्ट के लिए. तो उससे क्या होता कि एक तो हमारी जो जैसे मैंने पहले भी कहा कि इलेक्ट्रिसिटी क्राइसिस है, जो अदर इरिगेशन हमारी यहाँ सिस्टम जो है बेकार पड़ा है, वेटलैंड्स हमारे पास बहुत है, खुश्क साली बहुत पड़ जाती है कभी कभार यहाँ पे. तो ये जो वाटर क्राइसिस हमें यहाँ रहती तो वो जो है उसको पुर करने के लिए ये प्रपोज की गई थी. एंड और जो फ्लो वहां जा रहा था वो चाहते थे कि इसका पूरा फ्लो जो है हमें मिलना चाहिए. हालांकि जो है इसका हम भी तो हकदार हैं, हमें भी तो इंसाफ चाहिए. तो दैट इज वाई कि ये प्रोजेक्ट इंडिया ने उस टाइम प्रपोज किया था और हमें लगता है कि ये बहुत अच्छा फैसला था तब का.
The move that India has made as far as the Indus Water Treaty is concerned is a huge one. It is enormous. The implications will not be immediate. They will not be kinetic. They will not be spectacular in the next few days or weeks or even months. But this is one of the biggest moves that India has taken so far against Pakistan. Now, as part of this huge meltdown in Pakistan, the country's Defense Minister Khwaja Asif has said any structures that India builds in order to divert water as part of its Indus Water Treaty suspension will be destroyed by Pakistan. Now, this is, of course, very much in keeping with Pakistan's irresponsible and arrogant rhetoric. Khwaja Asif has been in the news for all the wrong reasons, even taking ownership of terror groups, etc. recently. So we mustn't pay too much attention to these grand claims by Pakistan. But it is a pointer to the fact that India has hit Pakistan where it hurts. And as we report from on the Wooler Lake, which I keep saying is the center point of where this entire action, the Indus Water Treaty suspension, is going to literally and proverbially flow from, it's important to realize that this is not just muscle flexing or psychological warfare by India. India has already conveyed its intent and will be pursuing this by all means and by all accounts, diplomatically, structurally, and politically. Sailing here on the serene Wooler Lake, it's impossible not to see it today for what it really is and has become. Leverage between India and Pakistan. Now, this is leverage, we have to say, that India has hesitated to use for many, many years, many, many decades, despite multiple provocations by Pakistan using terror. But that has completely changed now. Pakistan has tried to weaponize the fact that India has prevaricated over pushing the button and suspending the Indus Water Treaty, but no longer, because India's patience has run dry in the shadow of what happened in Pahalgam, and it is here from the Wooler Lake that the effects of it will flow. Patience has run dry, very much like the rivers, which probably will once things actually come into effect. Those scoffing at India's move, suspending the Indus Water Treaty, those who think it's just smoke and mirrors, well, India has already issued notice under Article 12 of the IWT for modification of this treaty. And therefore, if the Tulbul navigation project and other infrastructural moves on the Wooler Lake and beyond come into effect, it could be the beginning of the end of Pakistan's uninterrupted water privileges courtesy India. And remember, this isn't just a diversion. This is about ending the veto that Pakistan has taken for granted for way too long while perpetrating terror against India. And one must always remember before we end that when big decisions are taken between countries, it is the little people who face the immediate impact of those decisions. The suspension of the Indus Water Treaty and all of these people who've made their lives here on the banks of the Wooler Lake, which is now the battlefield of that water war between India and Pakistan, how do they feel about it? Sir, आपको क्या लगता है जो अभी इंडिया ने एक डिसीजन लिया है इंडस वाटर ट्रीटी को लेकर और काफी इम्पैक्ट यहाँ पर होगा, आपके क्या इच्छाएं हैं, क्या तमन्ना है?
हमारी इच्छा ये है, हम अराउंड द वॉलर रहते हैं, हमारा रोजगार मिलना चाहिए, वो लंबी बात है, दो मुल्क क्या कर सकते हैं, लेकिन यहाँ के लोकल उसको फायदा मिलना चाहिए, यहाँ के लोकल उसको रोजगार मिलना चाहिए, वही है।
आपको लगता है कि ये होगा? अब जो इंडस वाटर ट्रीटी था, वो बहुत साल से बात चल रही है कि उसको सस्पेंड करना चाहिए, पाकिस्तान आतंक फैला रहा है इसलिए सस्पेंड करना चाहिए। अब पहलगाम के बाद वो फाइनली हो गया है। क्या आपकी उम्मीद है कि इस बार कुछ होगा, अच्छा होगा आप लोगों के लिए?
करना चाहिए, हिंदुस्तान गवर्नमेंट को करना चाहिए हमारे लिए अच्छा, क्योंकि इसको कहते हैं बाय द पीपल, फॉर द पीपल, ऑफ द पीपल। लोगों को बचाने के लिए हिंदुस्तान गवर्नमेंट को कुछ करना चाहिए। हम भी हिंदुस्तानी है, ये सारे हिंदुस्तानी हैं।
There is every hope that with this big decision that India has taken, those changes will be good for them. They talk about unemployment, they talk about opportunities. There are little children running around here everywhere. Let us hope that the next time we visit the banks of the Wular Lake, it is entirely new and entirely changed. From the snows of the Kashmir highlands to the still waters of the Wular Lake, Indian waters have flowed without question into Pakistan for decades. But that era may be coming to an end. In fact, it will be coming soon to an end. And when that happens, the Wular will no longer just be a lake. It will be where the tide turned. With Ashwini Mehra, Shiv Arur, NDTV.
My ministerial colleague, Shri Jain Chaudhary ji, Ashish Dhawan ji, Manish Sabharwal ji, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join you all this morning for the launch of the Gati Foundation. I wish this initiative all the best as it seeks to promote and facilitate global access to talent from India. As you would all note, the two key words here are talent and global. And in many ways, bringing them together has been the responsibility of the Ministry of External Affairs. For reasons that I will dwell upon, it will be even more so in the times to come. Let us start with talent. At our current stage of development, there are two realities that stand out. One, that in the past, we have not developed and therefore not leveraged our human resources to the extent we could and should have. And the other, that it is not feasible for India to develop rapidly by emulating the pathway of other successful Asian economies that preceded it in the last few decades. The drivers of our growth are different, as is indeed the landscape, and I would argue the strategy. It is this awareness that has contributed, amongst others, to the government's approach towards a Viksit Bharat. Now, all of us are familiar with a wide range of initiatives and programs that have targeted the socio-economic welfare domain in the last decade. They start with child and maternal health, immunization, school admission and retention, access to electricity, piped water and roads, and move on to nutrition, to housing, to health coverage, and to support for entrepreneurships at different scales. These are supplemented by making it easier to do business, by improving the ease of living, by building a modern, accessible, and affordable infrastructure, expanding skills and education capacity, and promoting make, design,